guy's all clammed up. This is like family getting back together again. What are we
Yeah.
talking about here?
All right.
All of a sudden the cameras are rolling, Tom, and you got nothing to say.
I feel like it's a reunion.
It is a reunion,
Yeah.
right? So
That's
this
right.
started with Scott. He got me rolled in as employee number 7 into Verb. I'll never forget that interview. That was great.
No, Joe, I sent you pictures from last night, our dinner, saying how we missed you, and I was excited to see you. And it's just exciting to talk to you and everything you're doing for not just us, but doing for the whole field.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
I've said it, Scott's actually the person who got me started down this path. We sat in his office at Verb when we had to pull off the Verb hire agenda. And I said, Scott, I'm going to ask you to think about something. Let's tell these digital stories at scale. And he looked at me, as Scott does, and I was waiting. And he's like, let's do it. And then that really gave us permission to start telling stories at scale to the entire industry and supporting the industry. And that's where you and I met.
That's right. That's right. That was part of the early days of Verb Surgical, and then it's grown since then. But it was a fun ramp up. Verb and the collaboration was a lot of fun too. Right? So it's Verily, Verb, J&J in the early days. So that's how we got to know each other. Yeah.
And Tom grew up across the street from where I live right now. Yeah. Literally, I could throw a baseball and hit his mom's house. Well, she's here now, right?
Yeah, she lives out in California. Yeah, but yeah, that's right. We could still. She lived there about 6 years ago. You're right there down the street.
Right, Palm Beach Gardens.
Yeah.
So he literally, you could drive out my development, and his development was right across the street.
Incredible.
And then you and I met on LinkedIn. People always ask because we've become this thing in medtech, right? But we met on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I was watching Joe's stories and I was like, this is a really interesting way to kind of share medtech and share kind of innovation. And I thought I'm just gonna ping him and see what happens. Hey Joe, it's Nadine from Proximy. You know, can we have a conversation? And I think, you know, it was meant to be a 15-minute conversation, ended up extending into an hour and a half. Like, I missed the family lunch, I'm on the phone. Guys, I'm sorry, I'm on the phone with Joe. I need to have this conversation. And we just clicked. It was just this whole vision of the space and how it's changing and storytelling, I think, which is a really big part of it.
And now, Tom, you left Verily Google, and now you are, what's exactly your role at Proximy?
Yeah, so I'm Chief Product Officer at Proximy. Been there about 7 months with Nadine. It's been fun. Yeah. You made the connection, so
don't blame me.
You made the connection.
Yeah. And Scott, your role with Proximy?
I'm an advisor and a board observer, and basically, like many things, just do whatever Nadine
part of the family.
Needs. I draw the organization chart upside down. I'm at the bottom. I work for Nadine and Tom, and we're trying to solve things for all these patients and physicians around the world. How do we democratize healthcare? Back to Verb, what we were trying to do. 7.5 billion people on Earth, only 2.5 billion really have great access to surgery.
That's right.
How do we democratize that? And this is an extension of what we were doing there, that we started, when you came to the office in 2015 and said, we need to compete with Facebook, we need to compete with Google, we got to hire 250 people, we got to change the trajectory of surgery. It's like, I don't know if you remember, we had that curve that came from AstroTeller at Google X. It was like, technology is doing this, and humans' ability to adapt is doing this, and there's this gap. And how do we bend that curve up? Regulation-wise, technology, people, and that's what Proximy is part of, is bending that curve up. How do we, educate doctors? How do we scale physicians across all these patients that need care? And meeting her, I mean, what an evangelist, what a powerful visionary. As a surgeon, what I need to go solve that big, huge problem. And that's what gets me excited, is trying to help people solve those big problems.
And what all three of you think of is non-medtech related. So, Scott, you certainly, your chops were earned in medtech across the board. But when you got to, at least my experience with you, when you got to Verb Google, you never thought like a medtech guy. You thought like a tech guy. And I remember you instructing me as we sort of orchestrated an architect. Like,
instructed? You used to say, I told you what to do. But
you gave guidance, right?
Strong guidance.
and a Google guy, but before that, medtech guy.
That's right. That's right. I was at Optometrica when we launched laser cataract surgery, which was kind of a revolution in cataract surgery. And then we moved to Google, and that was kind of advent of getting that kind of medical devices into the tech space, and then now at Proximie, which is kind of the next level. I would say like enriching the operating room with data, right? In a trustworthy, high trust, well done way, right?
And I think the thing that you saw like at an Optometrica or Volcano, our predecessor companies, at that same time, this tech revolution was going on, right? And all these platforms, whether they were Uber or whether they were Airbnb or Google, where they were platform plays, Amazon, you saw these things happening and you saw the tech and you go, how do I apply that? Because these larger companies, no fault of theirs, they just aren't going to adapt to those new business opportunities like we could. So we saw those, and as entrepreneurial people in medtech, how do we disrupt the large guys, build these platforms, take advantage of scale, platform synergies and effects. That he brought examples from Optometrica, I brought from Volcano into Verb. That now you see, this term digital surgery, which we created in 2015, has become a standard word, and you hear it in digital dentistry, digital spine, digital surgery, which is great. It's fun to see happen.
Yeah, and at this point, the devices are getting rich enough, and they're actually gathering data from operating rooms, et cetera, that we can actually use the data in a lot more useful and constructive ways, which before with Optometrica Volcano days wasn't yet the case, and now it's kind of reaching that kind of tipping point. And so
but
we're
is
at
it
a great
technology
place.
in that area, Tom, or is it we're finally getting it that we need to have data-driven decisions in health tech, med tech, versus it being an art and a craft and a non-connected community?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of the two. One is being able to build out global, large-scale software architectures, right? Which was very difficult for smaller companies to be able to do even 5 years ago, and that's kind of where we are right now. And the other piece is that devices are getting more connected, and devices are getting smarter. And so combining those two things is really what's making the operating room a smarter environment.
And that aggregation, it's not just a linear function, right? It starts to have this absolutely, logarithmic addition of the data. Yeah. And then you come out of nowhere, sitting on an operating room floor on a bench, going, there's got to be a better way, just a few years ago. So.
Yeah, so it's 2015. What were you seeing or thinking?
I'd spent 10 years kind of traveling, trying to scale. I worked with so many device companies. I worked with global health organizations. And all I was really trying to do was, what we all needed, exactly what you talked about before, 2/3 of the world population don't have access to care. How do we scale it? How do we make expertise more accessible? How do we change the paradigm? How do we not incrementally change the OR, but actually just disrupt it? And sitting on that bench, looking at this operating, I'm thinking, this is so disconnected. It almost doesn't matter what beautiful devices you wheel in, they're all still disconnected. We're all still walking away, writing on a piece of paper what the operation that we did was, and then we walk away from that room and there's no digital footprint of what happened, no way to aggregate that knowledge, no way to feed it back in, learn from it, make an impact. And it's probably for a number of reasons. Firstly, healthcare is very complex. We sometimes, we need to continue to remind ourselves that it's patient-centered. There's a patient in there, and how do we make sure that we are creating an approach that's engulfing all the stakeholders and bringing them on the journey with us, whilst all centering around a patient. And in the same way that you guys pushed through in that kind of category, which is digital surgery, which we needed to start to move digital, like every other industry was moving digital, surgery needed to move digital. How do you then expand that to kind of the connected surgical care? So digitizing the operating room and then connecting all the dots. And so that was a vision a few years ago, but it goes back to execution. How do you bring around you the best team that can really be agile enough, adaptable, to continue to push and create and evolve and adapt, because it's difficult. It's a hard environment. And I think, over the last few years, had phenomenal people on the team, and being able to sit with Scott and Tom here today, part of the Proximie family, part of that change is just it's a true joy, to be able to make that difference.
Tom, what do you think about as, leading the technology charge, architecting a company like this, coming from a Google, you had a medical device background. Nadine said something about healthcare and the medical device world's complex, but is it also stubborn?
Yeah. Yeah, you know what? It's about, I like one of the things you said, which is it's about empowering across all these stakeholder groups, right? Everybody's in there and they're actually trying to make lives better for patients, right? It's the medical device companies, it's the hospital, it's the surgeon, all around the patient, right? And so then how do we do that in a responsible way? But get into the operating room, gather data, collect data, but in a way that's transparent, that's consented by the patient, that's clear to everybody involved what and how we're doing it. And then that's how we kind of amplify, right? So that's kind of what Proximy is trying to do at this point, and kind of
Joe,
get it to that point.
It's very interesting as any kind of market goes through different phases. It usually takes a new company to disrupt and create that new phase. If you look at supercomputers to minis to desktop computers to laptops to the phone, there's only one company that made a transition from one of those 5 phases to the other one. That was Apple into phones, and that's only because of one person who was the chief, product manager, Steve Jobs, who just said, we're going to do it. All the incentives in all these large companies are to basically, incrementalize and maintain the status quo. So it takes someone new in a new company in order to disrupt. So thus a Proximy, when you say, hey, you've got this whole stack in an OR of devices that can't be connected to each other. Well, they can be, but there's no incentive for Stryker to talk to Medtronic, to talk to J&J. So if you're using one person's clip applier, one stapler, one imaging system, they're not going to work together. But that's where you need a Proximy. You need a Switzerland to allow them to communicate, get the data, start to learn, provide them back the data. We were talking this morning, it's a lot like, we become the operating system. We become Microsoft on a Dell computer or on a IBM computer back in those PC days to drive that ability, like Bill Gates said, I want a desktop on every, a computer on every desktop. We want Proximy in every OR so that you don't have 47 different logins. You can communicate, you can aggregate data, you can get to scale. For us to have that scale, but also to provide it to others. So the same way, if Apple's iPhone wasn't an open platform, you wouldn't have Strava and Uber and Airbnb, because Apple would have had to develop all this. So we're trying to, Nadine, Tom, I'm just trying to help together, trying to create that, and I think we'll be very successful creating that operating system to get after this problem. But it's going to take us. Medtronic's not going to do it. They don't have the incentives. J&J's not going to do it. Too many people have to make choices across multiple divisions. People in EP might want something different than orthopedics, which might want something different, than in,
But it's cultural too.
Yeah.
If you think about the average
it is,
age,
the incentives and everything
the
else.
incentives and the culture. So if you go back, and it's interesting, if you look at the top, I think 8 strategics, the average age when they started was 1924. So that sets culture. And I don't care who you are, and this is where I think it's interesting, is I think Intuitive is one of the biggest threats out there, because they are a digitally cultural organization, where all the other strategics are not. So as you look at that ability to make that transition, you come from probably, evidence-based, Google, right? How did that shift your thinking, and what do you think about today in that area?
Yeah, I don't actually see it as threats. I see it as an aggregation of kind of all the content that is in the operating room, right? That's kind of how I look at it. I look at it global scale, but how do we do it in a way where we don't build data islands, right? That's specific to device, that's specific to region. Those are the types of things that introduce algorithmic bias, right? So how do we build a global platform across 40, 50, 60 regions that's getting heterogeneous data sets representative of the patient populations that they serve? That's kind of what Proximy is trying to build, which will include data sets from all these devices. It'll include data sets from all these hospitals, and that's kind of what we're building.
If you look at Google, where is that? They built a platform where they're collecting data from search, from photos, from maps, where they're driving around and mapping everything, and all of that had a synergistic effect. And then they layered on top other apps on an Android platform, et cetera, and it just kind of creates that logarithmic effect. Yeah. And I think that's where we're headed in the OR.
And there's an unspoken translational benefit to that. Yes, you may be part of a business unit that's focused on one particular specialty, or you may be a robotic company that's just focused on one thing. But actually the learnings that you get from the heterogeneous data sets about process or the OR or people or how things are working, there's so many other potentially even non-clinical data that is valuable, that could benefit maybe indirectly even these companies. So it's in everyone's benefit, either directly or indirectly, to kind of participate in this centralization, this central operating system. And it's, when we think about diversity and inclusion, It's a diversity of data sets, like Tom said. It's a diversity of the users, a diversity of the specialties, the diversity of the operating rooms and the cath labs and the environments. Every single bit or nugget of information that's coming out of those is going to be hugely collectively valuable than independently siloed on its own. And that's why we have to change.
How do you think about that across preoperatively, perioperatively, postoperatively, as a surgeon or a clinician?
Yeah. And traditionally, we've always ever thought pre, intra, post, 3 separate buckets, like see one, do one, teach one. Again, 3 separate buckets. That's the challenge. That's why it's disconnected. Where we started off, of course, our journey was in an operating room or in a cath lab. But the vision is to then extend and really create this kind of data flow that's coming across the pre, the intra, and the post. Because if you can connect those points across the patient journey, that's where the value becomes hugely insurmountable. And that's where you can really shift the total paradigm for a patient in surgery. You know, we're still in those early days of OR and just on the outskirts of the OR or the cath lab. But just wait till you start to plug into patient apps or into post-op monitoring or into different applications that can feed in. And that's why we took a really strategic decision early on to be software only and software first. Because the pace at which we can accelerate, at which we can adapt, we can open, as Scott kind of described, that kind of open platform that can bring different solutions together, means that that's what we can focus on our efforts on. There's enough hardware in operating rooms, and if it's not an operating room, you can buy it off the shelf. We don't have to recreate more of that. What we need to create is that centralized operating system that brings it all together.
Well, it plays to Scott's statement earlier, and it was one of the things I learned early at Verb with Scott was open architecture, right? Because if you become hardware anchored, you immediately have a barrier to progressive technology because you have a supply chain issue, you have hardware at the rate of acceleration right now that's occurring, but software, you have the easiest distribution, the easiest product development, the easiest feature development sort of capabilities, and you can learn sort of best practices from other industries, but if you're tied to the hardware, do you have that opportunity?
Yeah. No, I mean, that's absolutely true. And you also don't have the opportunity to pull in all these different apps, all these different social components, all these different post-operative planning and pre-operative planning, a post-operative assessment. So that's kind of, that's what we're doing at this stage.
What's the most popular operating system on cell phones in the world?
It's not iOS, is it?
Not even close.
It's like 5%, right?
It's Android.
Android, right.
And they work on multiple hardware platforms, and they have the most data, and they have, so.
And it's the most democratized because actually anyone can afford a variability of the different devices. And so in the same time, we had that conversation when we were out in Houston, right? I told you, well, yeah, we were used in Asia today, we were used in in Africa, we were used in the Middle East, we were used in London, we're being used in Baltimore, and then later in the day we're going to be used out in Seattle. All on different devices, in different use cases, clinical use cases, different instruments, different specialties. And that's the beauty of it. It's that ability to really think about that vision digital surgery, how you guys coined that and kind of created that new category, and then driving it forward to now expand it to that connected care.
So here's something interesting, and we were talking about this, the unobvious benefactors of this is the payers. Right, so we're hosing down digitally the OR or the cath lab, whichever it is, and the cost of healthcare isn't just the event itself. The cost of healthcare is much wider than that, and now we can actually go out to the fringes right now and address the unlocked value to the insurers, the payers, right? Because they have a risk during that procedure that they've got to put some capital in the bank, and we may not eliminate that risk, but what we will do is lessen that risk and loosen up that capital. So those payers have an interest in this becoming a standard, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, there's a long tail in reinsurance, right? And so there's a lot of interest in what is the data set that's happening in the operating room, right? And how do we target that in a way that's a lot more focused than generic, right? That's how we actually save costs in the healthcare system.
So Joe, I'd go back to manufacturing, and manufacturing has standardized processes. So as you standardize processes, you have less waste, you have higher quality, you have lower cost. You take commercial, flight. It's another example of this, where if you look at things at scale and with modernization of software and everything else, you can go to lower cost, more air miles flown, lower access. It's the same thing in the OR. And so if you can understand what procedure steps make the most sense, if you then get quality metrics after the case, now that informs training. So you can boost up the bottom 25%, you can boost up the top, the middle 33, and quality goes up, which means less readmissions, it means less blood loss. There's all these consequences, quality-wise and cost-wise, less instruments used, et cetera. And you can get to scale. When we were kids, hardly anybody flew. You look today, everybody doesn't think, you don't think twice about, taking a flight, pre or post-COVID, of course.
And we can scale deployment of new devices, new technologies for patients, right? Do this in a more efficient way, faster, so device companies can get there, but then patients can get the best care from those latest technologies as soon as possible.
When you can start to decentralize care, I mean, traditionally, we were moving towards, we're going to centralize all the, the doctors that are doing the super specialist cases in these hospitals, and so all the patients have to come into that central hospital. And of course that was done for good reason. At the time they wanted to make sure that there was enough volume and cadence so that you can actually continue to be skilled within those cases. But the challenge is the kind of the overflow that comes out of that. You look at an IDN system that could have, 10 or even 100 hospitals. Are you going to have every expertise at every site? Are you going to be able to maximize efficiency, care, quality, delivery, access at every single one of those hospitals? You aren't. And so what you can now start to do with these solutions is actually think about how do we crowdsource everything we've got at all these sites, optimize quality, and then redistribute it to all the sites. And we're so many experts coming to us saying, I would love to be able to support doctors, a hospital 50 miles away or 100 miles away that is part of my system, but I can't always travel there to be there with them. But now they can help more patients, I can get on with my practice as well, and we can start to upskill. So really kind of to Scott's point, is like how do we bring up the quality, standardize the quality, and how do we look at quality improvement, which is a science in and of itself in hospitals, and drive a more data-driven approach kind of from an operating room perspective.
Tom, the term telehealth is a really broad swimming pool.
Yeah.
And there's different lanes, right? You've got different proposed solutions out there. And we know the ones that are out there. Well, look, I mean, it's like Care Syntax and Joe DeVivo's In Touch and who am I leaving out of Al, right? And they're all sort of talking about different things. Do you process telehealth in a very specific way that is, I don't want to say different than them, but the conversation I hear Proximie having all the time is a lot different than that.
Yeah, I think for us it's about creating that connected ecosystem. It'll include those hardware platforms. It'll include all of those components into the operating room because we do need an access point to the operating room. How do we get data out of the operating room? That's a really interesting part. There's really good groups developing that. What Proximie is interested in is, again, global scale, developing a data ecosystem that's unbiased, that's based on GDPR, HIPAA compliance, and building out all of those components, the data engineering pieces of it, and then the data science pieces of it.
And so what do you worry about? This is a brand new platform. There's a brand new technology. What we just came out over the last 15 months certainly has empowered it and made it to the forefront about the usability of it. Yeah. But what do you worry about as the lead technologist with Proximie and the category in general?
Yeah, and being able to do it fast enough, right? I mean, there's so many operating rooms, and we're only getting there, right? One at a time at this point, hospital system at a time, and eventually, I think our biggest thing is we're going to be able to access those top-tier hospitals, which will be that's a done deal. But how do we access those developing regions, right? Where actually we need to get that access to high-quality care. That's actually what we think about the most. How does Proximie get into every operating room in the world? And every operating room means every region.
So this is a telecom play.
Yeah.
This isn't even a med device play anymore. This is an AT&T play, right? This is a Verizon play, or any of the big telecoms, because it's a pipeline of data into the 20% GDP in this country. I mean, we're obscenely imbalanced there, but it's the biggest spend in nearly every developed country in the world.
There's a connectivity piece of it. There's a compliance piece of it, which is unique to each region. That's a very hard thing to solve, right? Unique compliance to each region. There's a technical piece of it. How do we get actually really high quality video, really high quality audio in a low latency, even in low bandwidth settings? So those are the kind of things we think about.
And the fidelity of that information, both audio as well as video, is something that's not really been tapped before from a real-time use. Certainly we've used it as retrospective data in medtech, right? Imaging, We've gotten a scan, we apply a narrow AI to it. Ooh, look what I found,
That's right.
And there's that's very valuable.
That's right.
But what you're doing right now is you're getting real-time, high-fidelity information that we don't even know what we can mine out of that information yet.
Yeah. I mean, if I develop an algorithm based on data sets from academic institutions, that's not going to serve the patient population that doesn't have access to those academic institutions. So that's what we need to do, right? Is to be sure that it's a representative data set across the board.
And Scott, you sit at the forefront of evaluation of tech in the health tech industry. You, incredibly successful leader in these tech companies. You've always had choices since I've known you. What had you go, I will make time to advise this play in particular? And now, I didn't even put Tom in there yet, so.
No, I mean, it goes a little bit back to your question. If you think of these two axes where it's like low complexity, low tech, that's kind of how I think of telehealth with Teladoc. And the technology is not going to be that differentiated. The interaction, if my mom is doing a visit with her cardiologist, then as you go up, higher tech, higher complexity procedures, I think that's where there's a lot of value to democratize in those kind of procedures. So I think in terms of preoperatively, perioperatively platforms, that's where I'm focused a lot of my time, and then postoperatively. So this is one that helps tie all of those together. So whether it's Wonder Medical, which is social network of how do I activate the data, or it's Acutus, how do I collect the data. Acutus is doing that in EP, similar to what we were doing at Verb with a platform. These guys bolt on across that spectrum. So I'm looking for things that are like $10 billion plus market opportunities that address this 7.5 billion problem. And so for me, Proximie is in the center of that, and the ability to connect these devices, collect the data, analyze the data, and then with others, or I think it'll be under their umbrella, activate that data in a different way. And that's super interesting and powerful to me.
And it's a really hard problem to solve, right? If I have access to Google Photos, right, I have millions of photos that are available, right? Surgery is complicated, right? There's not that many surgical cases being done, relatively speaking, in order to develop these rich algorithms, right? That's why we're going at scale, and that's why we're going global with it.
And then
when you're sitting on these other boards, right? This is part of the answer to your question as well. I'm sitting there at Envista. We want to have digital dentistry for the whole platform play. Can we go create our own cloud? Can we go create our own connectivity platform? Are we going to be best in class in those? Same thing at Acutus, same thing at NuVasive, same thing at Viewer. I started looking at every company I'm involved in. I'm like, needs Proximie. That's pretty, that's a pretty good endorsement that maybe I should go.
I know a guy.
I know a guy, yeah. Or more importantly, a gal.
I know a girl. And and then finally, you sprung this on me, I don't know, last month or the month before. You can't bring a siloed approach to a system problem. Did I get that right?
That's right, yeah. Because, and having seen it, I think it's that kind of intimate firsthand knowledge, having spent thousands of hours in an operating room myself, having seen the frustrations, not just in the operating room, but from the system, the frustration across the stakeholders, whether it's working with med device partners who want to launch new products, whether it's the hospital itself, the system, the training, the quality, all of it was frustrating. And I said, we have to change this, but we can't have more point solutions. You look around, many people are trying to find a way to solve this challenge of surgery, inability to have access to the care and what we're describing. But everyone's coming at it in a very siloed, I'm going to create a singular training platform, or I'm going to create a post-op patient monitoring. All helpful, all useful, but disconnected still. So rather than trying to create more of the same, the approach I want to take is, well, how do we create the engine that connects everything and enables us to bring that all together? And at the end of the day, the beauty of all this is that it is, and you'll see it in the stories that we share and the vision we put out there, is it is about patients. Everything we do is patient-centered. And it's very easy sometimes when you're in the tech world and you're looking at all these amazing technologies to kind of lose sight of that. But when you're in that operating room and there's that patient and all the stakeholders around that patient that are trying to find a way to make things better, to improve access, it needs one company to come and say, we're going to help you, we're going to connect the dots for you. And it's a challenging task and feat, but I think we've got the right team and the right kind of vision to do it.
Well, I'm so glad we got the band back together here.
Just the beginning.
Just the beginning. So anything before we go out, Scott, you want to leave anything with the viewers to think about or watch for?
I mean, just in general, I think this is the most exciting time, Joe, like we were talking about before we sat down here. Most exciting time ever in medtech and life sciences, what I call, medtech 3.0. All of these technologies, whether it's sensors, computing power, AI, data, connectivity, 5G, I mean, they enable things like proximity, like Wonder, like these other connected platforms. So I just think it's a very exciting time. And if I'm at one of these other companies, I would say, look at what you're good at. How do I become great at that? And how do I partner with the people who can be great at other things? I mean, Uber, they're not going to develop their own cell phone. They're not going to develop their own GPS. What is Uber without a cell phone that has GPS as to where you're standing to pick that ride up? So similarly, what is Stryker as an isolated platform? They could try and build stuff out, which they maybe should, but then how do they provide connectivity, internet, cloud? It's probably they can go faster, working with a partner. I'm encouraging the companies I work with the Bright Insights of the world relative to cloud, work with the Proximies of the world in order to drive into this MedTech 3.0 world. And you can do that without having to make big investments, big bets. You can partner, you can hypothesize. That's one of the best and the biggest things I learned at Google, I have to tell you, is they're very good at funding things and they're very good at killing things. Mm-hmm. A lot of companies are terrible at killing things. They take too much time to figure out what they should fund. A lot of times, if it's an above the waterline kind of decision versus below the waterline, below the waterline sinks the boat, above the line, let's make the decision, let's hypothesize, A/B test things. If it's good, invest more and go. If it's not, then they kill it. And they don't blame people, they don't hold it down. Put them on the next exciting thing. So I think we're in that kind of period with MedTech 3.0, and I would encourage large companies, small companies to partner more to get after the bigger problem that we went into this industry for, which is the 7.5 billion people. It's why she went into medicine, it's why I went into medtech, it's why he's focused in medtech, hopefully why you are as well.
It's my only reason I've been
It's a
hanging around
privilege
for
to get to work
32
in the
years.
industry. So let's partner and go get it done. As I say, go, 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 right?
Yeah.
And you, before we head out?
I think surgery is just at the verge of that breakthrough, right? You've seen machine learning, you've seen data kind of integrate into all these different aspects of life, even in aspects of healthcare, right? Surgery is complicated. It's a very hard thing to get to, and we're just at the cusp of that. And I think proximity is just at the cusp of that.
Awesome. And the inspirational leader and founder and
Well, it's only due to success of a great team. I think there's an element of, a humility that comes with this. I think to the point that probably Scott's making, and as well as Tom's, like, it's complicated, but with humility, with openness to partner, to collaborate, we are at the cusp of actually breaking through and change. And it's not the incremental. We're gonna take a break the glass approach. We're gonna change the paradigm in the operating room and beyond. And I think that does require a vision, a humility with it, but a real aptitude for testing and agility to say let's keep testing through and make sure that we break through this and change the difference.
Well, listen, I know all three of you are insanely busy, and you carved out this time today. I'm sorry the backdrop sucked, but I am so thankful for our friendship and our professional relationships, and thanks for making the time for this today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for bringing us together.
So, the band's back together. LSI, Joe Mullings, be well.